so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Branson Brooks. I am a writer for the DC Voice, and I'm here with Peter Wood, Commissioner for Ward 1, representing single member District 3 and Adam Morgan Advisory Neighborhood Commission. And I'm glad to be here with you, Commissioner Wood.
I'm glad as well.
Thank you, thank you. And really, for my first question, I want to ask, what is the role of an ANC commissioner?
It's a great question, and I feel like a lot of people don't know the answer to that, including some commissioners. So it's important to make it clearer. So, an advisory neighborhood commissioner, I think we're around the anniversary of when those became a thing in the 70s. I think it was last week. An advisory neighborhood commissioner is an unpaid elected official. Every 2,000 people or so in DC have a position. It's not always filled, but right now most of them are filled. So every 2,000 or so people get a commissioner, and then neighborhoods are kind of grouped together into commissions. And really, we're there to be kind of a filter of community opinion. It's an advisory position. That's why the word advisory is in the name. So it's within DC's democracy, which of course is tainted because we don't have statehood. So it's not entirely local, but of the local portion that we control, commissioners exist to basically be a voice for the people, but kind of in a more efficient way than having town halls with hundreds or thousands of people come every time. It's a way to, a representative democracy, have people that are elected to try to assess what people in the community want. Uh, Not always a consensus, so it takes a bit of work to figure out how to communicate those needs, especially when they conflict.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I know you're obviously trying to hear the voices of the people. That kind of what you're here for. And I know at Morgan obviously have a big diversity range of people, so it can obviously probably get hard for that standpoint.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because it's not just, well, we're elected by the voters, but we also represent people who can't vote. For example, like children, or, well, it's going to change, but for the longest time, non-residents or non-citizens, excuse me. Now the green card holders can start voting in ANC elections this year. But my point is that there's a lot of people that don't vote for you that you still impact. For example, people that don't live in your neighborhood but spend a lot of time working or as a customer of institutions, whatever. So it gets a bit tricky of how do you balance all of those needs because not everyone can hold you accountable in the same ways, but it's an art, I suppose.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely got you on that. And really quickly, you said it was the anniversary since ANC commissioner kind of became a thing last week. Were you guys able to do anything for the anniversary, or is something you guys acknowledged?
No and no. I mean, it's not something that's like common knowledge, and I just happened to be reading about it in the last few days or something. But I mean, it's just I think from when the first I should double check my history, but I think that the DC Council's Twitter account or something posted about it. And that's how I got reminded where in the 70s it was the first kind of iteration of elections. And things have changed a bit. In a lot of ways, they haven't changed at all, but not sure if I'm not opposed to celebrating it, but there's work to do. So we've been focusing on that.
Okay, make sure got to get the work done at the end of the day. Yes, sir. Got you. Got you. And for my next question, I kind of wanted to ask, with it now being a little bit more than over 2 years since your reelection as commissioner of Adams Morgan, how have you seen Adams Morgan change in your short time?
It's a good question. I should probably reflect on it more often. I mean, it's hard when there's a 2-year election cycle, and the pandemic obviously made things different. So we're kind of still seeing changes related to that, which is not always easy to figure out what those are. But I mean, the biggest change is the thing that always happens, which I don't know, some non-trivial percentage of this part of town, not just Adams Morgan, but like a lot of the sort of close to the White House, DC, and probably other parts too, has a lot of people who are renters, and a lot of the renters sometimes for forces out of their control are transient. They don't stay in the same spot for very long. It's expensive to live in places, so there's a lot of people coming in and out all the time. So it's different in the sense that you get different people around, but it's consistent in the sense that that change is always happening. In more tangible examples, like there are a bunch of public works projects that have happened in the district that I represent specifically. It's a small example, but it was something that I was proud of, which is getting 2 blocks of 2 roads turned into one ways. It took a lot of patience and coordination with the people who actually do the work at the DC agencies, but that was something that is visibly different. That I think it's made things a lot better. Traffic congestion and the fights that came out of them have almost entirely gone away because of it. Some stuff in the parks that's getting fixed and improved, which is going on too. The streeteries on 18th Street is another thing where they haven't changed dramatically since they were started. They might get tweaked in the future, but the popularity I think has continued to rise, which is in my mind a good thing.
What are some of the most pressing issues in War with Adam Morgan? And in your role, how have you feel you've addressed them so far?
Well, like I was saying, I think that different types of safety is really important, and it gets more broad than I think a lot of people give it credit. But the ability to move around freely and free of fear, really. And that includes things like making it so that people who are prone to violent behavior maybe aren't being violent, especially in public or shared spaces. But also things like traffic safety. I mean, we've had multiple people in my tenure alone that have been hurt or killed because of all those things, gun violence, vehicular violence. Domestic violence is also a thing that I try to spend a lot of time advocating for support. It gets brushed aside for, I guess, predictable reasons because a lot of domestic violence is really hidden. When it happens in homes, it's often covered up. It's often done by people in positions of power, even if it's relative power. So not like a powerful person, but somebody who is head of household, that kind of thing. So I think that's really important as well. That's kind of a touch of it. I could go on and on, all the different topics that matter, but I think that those are usually on the top of my mind for me.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely makes sense. Definitely makes sense. I also wanted to talk about kind of since with you being one of the main voices for Adams Morgan, with Columbia Heights being right there, how do you feel about the relations between both of the two districts and how can it grow in your eyes?
I mean, there's a lot of ways. I try to remind myself that not everything has to go through government. So if we want to build a strong community, some of it is as simple as just getting people together or getting ourselves together and just being friends and being people that just have enjoyable experiences together, which is hard to legislate, of course, but I think that's really important. That's just what community building is, which is people sharing time and space and energy and interests. So I'm just in favor of that in general. I mean, that sort of stuff will come out of organized events and things like festivals, stuff like that doesn't hurt. From the ANC perspective, I'm lucky because all five ANCs in Ward 1, we have chairs that we addressed this as soon as we became chairs at the beginning of 2023. And we said, hey, we seem like we have reasonably similar perspectives on how we want to operate. How about we get together informally and try to support one another just to try to think about things of how we do our jobs, which means more time. Not everyone is able to do that, but we were like, yeah, we can make it work for the time being. And it's been a really helpful thing to try to get exactly what you're kind of hinting at, collaboration across neighborhood boundaries so that it's not just kind of living in silos, but we're aware that there's people who live not that far away, a few blocks sometimes, that are going through similar but different things. And it can be really helpful to kind of reflect on stuff together just to make sure that maybe there's solutions or ideas that we hadn't thought of that someone literally next door is already thinking of, and that can really save us a lot of time and energy if we just work together. It's often amazing when we kind of catch ourselves thinking how contained our lives can be. It's like we have the same places we get food, the same place we go to work or school or whatever we do to occupy our time. And it can be really easy to forget that just a couple of blocks away sometimes just a few buildings away, it'll be, another world. And it doesn't take that much to kind of break down those boundaries, but it just takes a little bit of what initial energy to try to get that going. And then when you do, it's like, oh wow, all of this was going on. I should have been more outgoing, paying more attention. I think it's really rewarding.
Sir, yes, sir. Definitely got you on that. And with us kind of talk about the Adams Morgan, Columbia Heights area, what do you have any favorite place to spend in Ward One, being kind of specialized in those areas?
Uh, so I'll answer this two ways. One's kind of a cliche answer, but I totally mean it, which I really do enjoy anytime I get to be out and just kind of talking to people, even people that disagree with me or that I think are misinformed. Like some people I think are difficult, but in general, like 90% of the time or higher, it's really rewarding just to get to just hear what's on people's minds and get to know each other as neighbors. I really do enjoy that. Can be people from renters to homeowners to business owners to staff to just kind of people that are visiting. I enjoy that a lot. So that kind of just happens on sidewalks and stuff. But beyond that, I am really lucky that in my district there's a really good park. It's a small park that has some charm to it, Calorama Park. So I enjoy being there, specifically in Adams Morgan. But also, like, we're really lucky. There's a lot of restaurants and bars and other small businesses that are located in the business corridor here on mostly 18th and Columbia. And most of them are really well operated, and it's just pretty easy to be able to literally walk down the street and have a lot of stuff similar to Columbia Heights, similar to a lot of neighborhoods where being able to literally just walk to the grocery store or walk to the things that I want and need in my daily life makes it huge. And I think that's something that, at least for me, is important to pursue just collectively, that the more people that have access to that want it, or at least have the option to have an accessible daily life, I think is really good for everybody because the benefits of that trickle in a lot of directions. Just takes a lot of work to get there first.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I actually was on Twitter on X or Twitter or X, what it's themed as now, and
Yeah.
actually stumbled on your Twitter account, and I actually was able to see you taking a late night stroll, and when you were kind of surprised to see people playing basketball during January. So that did kind of show me the kind of personable stance you're really trying to take at Adams Morgan. So I was really glad to see that.
Yeah, I mean, I love shooting around. It's hard to get time with the hoops here because there's only so many courts.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was that 80-degree day where it was just like everybody, anytime the weather is good, and I think that was a good example of it. Like it's bad that our climate change is human induced and scary, but when there's good weather, people flock to our parks and recreation spaces, and it's important to provide those because so many people just want to be out and just having enjoyable experiences, just living life. And we deserve to have the resources as a community to have that. Just, 100% across the board, all of DC deserves that. So try to push for it. I'm glad you saw that. It was a good photo too. I caught somebody mid jump shot, so I was happy.
Yes, sir. Yes, I got my little highlight tape. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So really for my next question, you talked about how you kind of like to get into the actual city and talk to people to kind of find out what's going on. How else do you stay informed about current events and issues affecting the city?
In DC, we're really lucky there. Sorry, that's my dryer. We're really lucky in DC just because there's a pretty good local press. I mean, it's not in the ideal state if you're looking at what's going on with Washington Post budget, but there's a lot of resources. So I try to stay up to date with a lot of the local news, and they do good things like daily email summaries of what their top stories are, stuff like that. That's a good starting point just because you pretty much just need an internet connection for it. Going out and just kind of, and this is politics, which is the hard part of trying to make accurate observations of what the public pulse is. So some of that just comes from talking to people. Some of it comes from being observant. We also have a lot of data. It's not the only way to try to understand what's going on, but I think it's important to find as objective as possible of measures to see what's going on. So like DC is a data-rich city. We
Mhm.
have a lot of different organizations and agencies and stuff that are collecting data that you can use. I'm a geographer by training, so I like making maps. So whenever I get to visualize something that's going on in the neighborhood of the city, but put it into a map, I think it's really beneficial because I like maps, but also I think they're really effective tools at communicating things in a way that you might not think about otherwise, just because what we we're talking about earlier, when you're putting things into the context of where you live as opposed to just your lived experience, it
Mhm.
helps make that lived experience something that is kind of a bit better understood, just because otherwise we can get really sucked into how we feel about things, which is really important because feelings are valid, but also they're not the only thing. It's important to be objective about things as well to kind of complement that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I seen your geography and your kind of research and how you kind of dove into Latin American telecommunication and geopolitics recently. So with knowing that the Columbia Heights Latin American population, how big a huge impact they have there, has that kind of helped you kind of better know the area and kind of get a better sense of what going on as well and kind of put yourself in their shoes?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, Adams Morgan be also very Latino, Black and Latino. Like a lot of neighborhoods, the dynamics have changed, some for very bad reasons, some for complicated reasons, but like in general, DC still is a pretty diverse city. It's hard because, I always want to be able to speak everyone's language and it's impossible. But I do speak Spanish and Portuguese, which is helpful in DC because there's a lot of Spanish speakers in particular and a decent amount of Portuguese speakers. So not everyone wants to be spoken to. I mean, especially if you're going around saying, "Hey, I'm technically a government official." People often, like, I get it. It's like, I'm good. I don't need to, I don't need to talk. But like when I make it clear, I genuinely just want to hear what people are up to and how they're doing and how can they be better served. people open up, and it depends on the day or the week or whatever, but sometimes it definitely helps people feel like they can talk more if they can chat in Spanish. So I try to use that whenever possible. And just also like I'm not Latino, but I have I think decent exposure to Latino culture. So something that I can always learn from and just kind of reflect on as I just meet more people in the community.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely makes a lot of sense. And you kind of talked about how you obviously receive a lot of data as a commissioner, but you would also like to stay transparent with the community. But they obviously sometimes we are skeptical to receive that. What steps do you take to ensure transparency and accountability within yourself and between the community? And how do you better that trust between you guys?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so my approach, for whatever it's worth, is basically, the two times I've campaigned, I've told people this. I said, look, a lot of these meetings that we have as commissioners aren't that interesting. There's a lot of stuff that kind of has to come across our agendas or whatever, but it's not really fascinating to watch. I wouldn't waste your time on it as just an unrelated party. If you're just happen to be a neighbor, it's probably not a good use of your time, but it's good use of our time. So I say, okay, if I will make it so that, or I will support the idea or communicate the idea of most people not having to come to too much formal stuff, but I will do my best to make sure that I'm clear and concise about everything that's going on. I do it as simple as I have a website that I keep my monthly updates on. I email those out to people. You can only do so much if you're an unpaid official because you don't have really staff or budget, but I do my best, and I think that's important. And most people too, I think, just kind of get it. They can perceive who is being genuine or not. So I just try to be that. And I hope and think that people pick up on that, kind of realize, oh, this guy cares about what he's doing and he's honest. And the more you do that, the more people kind of develop that trust and value it because we got a history of it. So it's a slow process, but when it comes, I think it can be really lasting.
Yes, sir. There's a building that reputation of accountability. That's really the main thing. So I definitely got you on that. And you talked about how you're technically an underpaid official. Obviously, you know what I'm saying. One of the what kind of inspired you to kind of want to do this position in the first place, being that it probably wasn't the money side of things. So really, what inspired your passions for you to want to this come out and do this?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been an advocate for volunteering. Like I do some other types of volunteering as well, but it's not as civic oriented. I've always been interested and usually involved in stuff like politics or just governance in some capacity. And when I first ran, it was 2020, so that was when lockdown and stuff was going on, and it was a scary time, and also, it was a hard time to get to talk to people and to see what's going on and to have valid reasons for approaching people. So I
Yeah.
kind of thought, wait a second, I want to have a legitimate reason to get to at least be in some sort of communication with more neighbors. And also, I was trying to force myself to do a better job of paying attention to the current events and some of the history that ties to it in DC and Adams Morgan. So I kind of just, after thinking about that, said, you know what, I think it would be a good fit. I'm going to run for this office and see where it goes. I was lucky, well, not lucky, but I was fortunate to have a lot of people that supported my campaign and voted for me. So I think it's worked out, but that's how it started. Well, it's not super interesting. I was like, how can I meet people and learn more? So I'll just do that. And here we are.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And do you feel like I want to say that you've gotten all of you set out for and even more since you in these last 2 years since you've been commissioner?
That's a tough question. Yeah, I'll say yes. That's the easier response. I mean,
Okay.
it's hard to set your expectations, I think, because no one really gives you a clear idea of what being a commissioner is, and which is okay. You figure it out as you go. But at least for my expectations, I think that's the case. And I also one of the things kind of tying back to the transparency, at least up to this point, every year I've had kind of a year summary of everything I've done and included in that include goals and specify what the goals are. And then I, at the end of the year, revisit those goals and give myself grades saying, hey, this is what I think, this is what went well, this is where I probably could have improved more, this is what didn't happen, but it was out of my control. I like to do that just because I don't see it a ton. And especially in politics, people hold themselves accountable only when it's good publicity, but when it's not as good, it's kind of like, oh, we're going to conveniently sweep that under the rug. And I try to be open with it. So it's like motivation to not do anything badly. Because if so, people will be able to say, hey, what was that? So it's just about honesty. So I like doing that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely makes a lot of sense. And then really for my closing out question, you kind of talked about your goals and this time of trying to align those and set those out for yourself. If you could, can you just please set out maybe a couple goals that you feel like you have for Adams Morgan just going into the next couple months as we kind of try to rev up the 2024 year?
Yeah, definitely. And this is a good time to ask that question too, because it's the performance oversight and budget oversight season for DC. So a big goal is to try to advocate for the things that people need. It's going to probably be a tough budget year, is what people are saying. So DC has pretty good tax base because we have a lot of people that have reasonably good incomes, but it's not always taxed at great levels. And also, a lot of the things that the tax revenue depends on, like commercial properties, is kind of having a tough moment. So I think that the point is to try to find and identify the things that are good for Adams Morgan and DC in general, that if we take care of them now, it'll save us money in the long term. Things like making sure the fire department's well supported, making sure that people are getting into sustainably affordable housing now, as opposed to pushing down the road where more problems come up and that becomes harder for those people, but also more expensive for the city government. Stuff like that, just trying to identify what those needs are, because ideally we would have tons of cash, kind of like we did when the pandemic happened. We got a lot of federal money. So it's a little bit easier to say, hey, well, to say this as a council member or the mayor, to say, hey, we can kind of support more of these programs because we got a little bit of cash laying around. It's not the case this year, it seems. So really trying to be strategic on how to do that. And it's not going to be easy, but I think that's the goal as a commissioner, is to be able to listen to and communicate those needs of constituents. And I think it's an important detail as well, is that even though we're elected by people in a specific neighborhood, commissioners are sworn when we start every term, we're sworn to serve DC as a whole. So I always try to keep that in mind, because no neighborhood exists in a vacuum. We depend on one another in different ways across the city. So it's important to fight for those interests collectively as a city as well.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And are you often able to kind of network and kind of flush ideas with the other council members and commissioners as well?
Yeah, I try to. It's not something that always happens, but like periodically people do try to find ways to communicate across the city as commissioners, especially. So I've been involved in some of those efforts. Actually, it was yesterday that 15 or so of the 46 commission chairs across the city, we got together. It was open to everyone, but the people who were free to join, we got together at MLK Library and had a little informal gathering, just trying to discuss what can we do to support one another to make sure that as ANCs we can do good work. And stuff like that's really helpful. It's a matter of scheduling. Not everyone is always free. You
Mhm.
try to also find ways that you're discussing things that you can actually be productive on, because if you're just focusing on stuff that's kind of conflict prone, it doesn't go anywhere, which is okay. But I think we're doing a good job so far. So I've been happy to be involved with that stuff.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And I know, obviously, like you said, it's probably hard to kind of match up schedules, but once you kind of are, you kind of all are looking to kind of be able to rant, kind of talk about the things you guys have all been going through with each of your guys' wards. So I know it's obviously probably a good thing to talk about or a good thing to get to.
Oh, and especially across the city. And this is true just in general, not just as a commissioner. But anytime you find somebody that is, living in the same place as you, but also living a very different experience than you, it can be really rewarding, I think, for everybody, just to be like, oh, I didn't think of things like that. And it's nice, especially when there are people that are really cool and easy to talk to. I think that really just makes it valuable, because it's like, yeah, we get each other, but we don't have to explain ourselves. And also we're learning from each other at the same time, because we see things a little bit differently just based on life experience or whatever.
Yes, sir. Definitely sounds like a great time. And like I said, that was really all the questions I had. I would like to thank you, Mr. Commissioner Wood, for taking the time to speak with me and sharing with the DC Voice audience and readers.
It's great to be here, and I appreciate your time and great questions.